Have you ever felt like someone who's gone is still around? A scent that suddenly fills the air, a song that starts playing just as you were thinking about them, or that quiet sense of presence, like they're still there, watching over you. Maybe that's not just longing, maybe it's real. What if the dead can hear you, see you, and still miss you? Many spiritual teachings, including deep insights from Buddhism, say that death is not the end, but a transition. The soul doesn't disappear. It just shifts to another plane, another frequency. And from that side, they continue to feel, to love, and to stay connected to those who remain. They don't just disconnect. Many stay close, watching with care, hearing our words, feeling our emotions. And all of this happens in a quieter way. But it's far more real than we imagine. In this video, you'll discover the reality behind life after death. What the dead still perceive, how they connect with us, why some stay nearby while others move on, and most importantly, how our words, thoughts, and emotions still reach those who have passed. This understanding can bring peace, healing, or even a chill to your soul. But one way or another, you'll never look at death the same way again. So stay with me until the end. This video isn't just information. It's a call to your heart. If this message touched you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and comment below. Your love still reaches me, and mine still reaches you. Because when we speak with love, they hear us. A lot of people still believe that death is the end, that everything stops when the heart stops beating, when the body is buried, when the eyes close for the last time. But many spiritual traditions around the world, from Buddhism to Spiritism, from Hinduism to ancestral healing practices, say just the opposite. Consciousness doesn't die with the body. What we call death is simply a change of state. The soul leaves the physical plane but continues to live in a much subtler, yet very real, dimension. Modern science, through near-death experience studies, is also beginning to touch on this mystery. People who've come back report remembering everything, what they saw, felt, and heard while their bodies were clinically off. They describe remarkable mental clarity, a deep sense of peace, and often the feeling that they were observing everything from outside, fully conscious. That already shows us that what we think of as the end might actually be the beginning of something much greater. The soul, in this new state, inhabits a more subtle reality, one not visible to the physical eye, but one that can be felt, both by those who are there and by those who are still here. That's why so many people feel the presence of loved ones who have passed, have vivid dreams about them, or even notice clear signs, scents, falling objects, flickering lights, songs playing at just the right moment. All of that is communication. All of it is a sign that consciousness is alive, just on another frequency. This new plane where the soul continues isn't the same for everyone. What a person takes with them is not their body. It's what they built inside, emotions, thoughts, lessons, and most importantly, bonds of love. These ties are eternal. That's why a person's consciousness stays connected to the ones they loved. They see, hear, feel. And even if they can't interact the same way they used to, they remain present, often in ways far more intense than we can imagine. Accepting that consciousness survives physical death doesn't require blind faith. It requires awareness. The signs are there, the evidence is growing, and intuition confirms it. From that point on, we begin to realize that death is not a cut-off, but a transition. And that changes everything, especially when we think about those who have already passed. They're not completely gone. They've just changed location. Death shuts down the body's function, but it doesn't immediately erase the bonds between souls. For many who pass, the connection with important people in their life continues in a subtle, silent, and ongoing way for a while. That doesn't mean they're stuck, or wandering, or trying to interfere. It means there's a real field of perception where bonds are still felt, even across planes. Instead of a physical presence, what remains is a vibrational one. A heightened awareness of what's happening with those left behind, especially when there's emotional alignment or unresolved connection. This perception doesn't work like human senses. Spirits don't see the way the living do, don't hear like our ears hear, and don't communicate with words. It's a form of consciousness that picks up on energy, thoughts, intentions, emotions. That's why so many people report, in moments of grief or deep longing, sensations of presence, a chill, a strange silence, an unusual dream. These are echoes of that connection, not emotional illusions. Those who've passed on, especially if still connected to someone here, can perceive these signals clearly. This shouldn't be taken as a rule. Not every spirit stays aware of what happens on the physical plane. Many move on peacefully, with no need to keep in touch. But there are cases where the awareness remains, by the spirit's own choice or due to the strength of the bond. The important thing to understand is that this observation is not a constant visit or an invasion. It's a silent attention, sometimes brief, that appears in specific moments, and usually it happens when there's an openness on our side. It's also important to remember that this perception can go both ways. Someone still alive, in a moment of introspection, can often pick up fragments of that presence. That's where those sudden intuitive moments come from, intense memories without any clear trigger, or even the feeling of being calmly watched. The mistake is turning that into a need. It's not about maintaining constant contact, but recognizing that in certain moments the bridge appears and then fades. It's not there forever and shouldn't be forced. Realizing that those who have passed can still notice what's happening here is not a reason for fear or attachment. It's an invitation to be responsible for what you emit, feel, and think. The consciousness on the other side isn't watching your every move, but it can be affected by how you deal with the absence. If there's excessive suffering, demands, or constant pleas for signs, that energy reaches them. But if there's serenity, respect, and clarity, the perception happens with lightness. The bond exists, but it should be handled with balance. Sometimes the soul's continued presence is tied to its own emotional state. There might be confusion, attachment, or even denial of death. This is especially true when someone dies suddenly without internal preparation. In those cases, the spirit can remain attached to routines, places, people, or objects, not out of malice, but out of disorientation. They still vibrate close to what they knew, as if trying to make sense of what happened. In such cases, prayers, silence, and spiritual guidance play a vital role in helping with the transition. There are also times when those who remain in the physical world make it harder for the soul to detach. Intense grief, resistance to mourning, and constant attempts to make contact create an energetic field that holds the soul in an in-between state. This doesn't happen because the spirit is weak, but because the emotional connection is still strong, and the living person keeps it actively going. In such cases, what was meant to be a brief presence can be unnecessarily prolonged. That's why emotional balance for the living is so important. Understanding why some souls stay close helps us change how we deal with that presence. The goal isn't to ignore or cling, but to acknowledge. If you feel someone nearby, observe. Reflect on whether that presence is being pulled by your own neediness or if it's a brief, spontaneous, natural visit. No soul needs to be held. All should have the right to move on. And our role, on this side, is to allow that to happen with as little interference and as much awareness as possible. Recognizing the presence of someone who passed can be comforting at first, but over time we must understand that this presence shouldn't be artificially prolonged. The consciousness that has left the body has its own path to follow, processes to continue, and lessons to learn, even outside the physical world. Staying attached to emotions, memories, and the constant need for contact can create a field of retention that helps neither the departed nor the living. There comes a time when the bond must transform, not disappear, but no longer be a burden. This process of letting go is often harder for the living. The absence creates a void, and it's natural for the mind to want to fill that space. But when that turns into emotional dependence, constant pleading, and daily suffering, the result is the opposite of what's hoped for. The connection becomes heavy, forced, and the spirit may be held near by an emotional weight that should have already dissolved. And this kind of constant presence isn't always positive. It can bring delay and confusion to both sides. Letting go isn't forgetting. It's not abandoning memories or pretending nothing happened. It's understanding that the person's presence needs to change form. What once was physical can now become silence. What once was routine can now be memory. The consciousness of the one who passed needs freedom to continue their path of expansion, and that only happens when those who remain accept the new reality without constant resistance. Healthy grief acknowledges the pain, but also allows for life to go on. Many avoid this release out of fear of losing the connection, but what maintains the bond isn't suffering, it's respect. From the moment you let go with awareness, the link still exists, but in a lighter, subtler, more spontaneous way. The spirit doesn't need to be constantly called on to exist. If there's something that needs to be communicated, felt, or resolved, it will happen at the right time, without needing to force anything. Letting go is trusting that what was lived remains, even if the presence is no longer physical. This kind of release requires maturity. It means looking inward, recognizing your own emotional patterns, and consciously choosing to let go, not out of coldness, but out of spiritual responsibility. If you feel you're holding on to someone who should have already moved on, be honest with yourself. In silence, say what needs to be said. Finish what still needs closure within you, and allow the consciousness on the other side to continue their journey. Because evolving also means letting go of those who no longer belong to this plane. The idea that the dead rest in peace, as if sleeping forever, ignores a fundamental truth about consciousness. It doesn't go out. It simply changes state. Once outside the physical body, the soul continues to move, still perceiving, processing, and interacting with what remains energetically close. That includes, above all, the vibrational field of those who stayed behind. They don't feel the way we do, but they still pick up on what we emit. And that has consequences, both positive and negative. Many spirits are able to move on peacefully because those who remained respected the silence and the mourning process. But when there's insistence, prolonged suffering, emotional demands, or forced attempts to stay connected, what's created is a dense field that directly affects the perception of the consciousness that passed. They feel that weight, and even without being trapped, they can be pulled back emotionally into situations that should have already ended. That creates exhaustion, confusion, and in some cases, real suffering. This kind of suffering isn't the same as physical pain or human sadness. It happens when the spirit realizes that the person who stayed behind is unbalanced, trapped in emotions that block their own growth. There's a sense of helplessness, of limitation. They understand what's happening, but they know they can no longer act as they once did. And that creates a kind of spiritual tension, presence without action, perception without interference. A mature consciousness feels, observes, and in some cases suffers with the emotional state of the one they left behind. That's why many spiritual accounts, both in religious teachings and mediumistic experiences, show how deeply the emotional state of the living affects those who have passed. When there's acceptance, respect, and silence, the spirit finds the space to continue their journey. But when there's constant despair, promises to never move on, or exaggerated emotional dependency, the soul feels that call and, out of compassion, may respond, even if that delays its own progress. The connection exists, so does the responsibility. On the other hand, a balanced relationship with someone who has passed can be beneficial for both sides. When there's sincere remembrance, words spoken with internal clarity, thoughts directed calmly, that energy reaches the other side as a sign of honor, not of burden. The soul that has moved on receives that energy as something strengthening, something that validates what was lived, but doesn't demand a response. That's the difference between a healthy connection and a binding attachment. The first offers freedom. The second demands presence, as if there were still an obligation. Those who pass on still perceive what truly matters. And that's why the best way to keep a genuine connection with someone who has died is not to beg for signs or live stuck in the past. It's to live with integrity, make conscious choices, and maintain emotional maturity. If there's something that needs to be said, say it, but with serenity. If there's something to be resolved inside yourself, resolve it, but without turning absence into an emotional crutch. Communication between planes does happen, but it's only clear when there is balance. And balance begins on this side. The connection with someone who has passed isn't a privilege reserved for mediums or spiritual initiates. It's available to anyone who keeps a clear intention and an emotionally balanced stance. However, this connection doesn't happen on demand, nor as an immediate response to a plea. It happens when there is alignment between what is emitted here and what can be perceived on the other side. It's a communication based on frequency, not effort. And to reach it, more important than calling, is knowing how to position yourself with respect and awareness. Many make the mistake of turning the desire to feel someone's presence into a constant emotional need. They create invocation routines, try to interpret signs in everything, and end up living tied to the expectation of contact, as if that would prove the bond still exists. This behavior not only wears down those still here, but can also interfere with the soul's process of detachment from this plane. Contact with the invisible must be natural, spontaneous, and, above all, unnecessary. It should come as a result of sincere vibration, not emotional demand. The most effective ways to establish a true connection are simple: being silent, reflecting with clarity, writing what needs to be said, or just mentally visualizing the presence with emotional neutrality. These are far more direct paths than any elaborate ritual. What opens the channel is not ceremony, it's intention. And the cleaner the intention, the more perceptible the response. In many cases, the answer won't come as a visible sign, but as an internal sense of closure, peace, or something simply falling into place. That, in itself, is a kind of response. Another key is knowing the difference between connecting and clinging. It's one thing to remember someone with respect and occasionally feel their presence. It's another to live in constant need of it, turning absence into a space where nothing else can grow. The spirit that passed on shouldn't be pressured to stay near or to prove they're still around. If the bond is real, it endures, quietly. Spiritual maturity means understanding that true connection doesn't require constant contact. It sustains itself. If you want to keep a space open for that communication, let it be light, silent, and flexible. A thought on special days, a candle lit with awareness, a direct prayer without requests. All of this works when it's not loaded with emotional demands. What's transmitted with balance is received with clarity. On the other side, the consciousness that picks up on that energy understands there's no urgency, no expectation, only recognition. And it's in that space that contact can truly happen. Finally, it's essential to remember that not every presence will be felt, and not every sign will be obvious. And that's okay. Physical absence is real, and the emptiness it leaves must be lived with integrity. But if the bond is true, it doesn't disappear. It simply changes form. And when you understand that, you no longer need to search for signs. You simply live with the certainty that somewhere what was built still remains. And that is enough. Once you understand that it's possible to maintain a connection with those who've passed in a balanced and respectful way, it's time to look at the next step: your own life. Many people hold on to the idea that continuing to live, to smile, or to make plans might seem like indifference or forgetting. But that's a common emotional distortion. Moving forward isn't abandoning memories or erasing bonds. It's simply recognizing that life continues, and that honoring those who've passed includes living with dignity and presence in the now. Clinging to absence can become an emotional cycle disguised as tribute. Constant pain, prolonged mourning, and the refusal to rebuild your reality often become ways to keep a sense of presence alive, even if that costs emotional health, important decisions, and new beginnings. The truth is that the consciousness of the departed doesn't expect stagnation. Much less does it want to be the reason you're stuck. What was lived still matters, but what needs to be lived now can't be postponed forever. Continuing life doesn't lessen the importance of the one who's gone. On the contrary, it's precisely because of all that was lived, shared, and learned that it's worth rebuilding what remains and moving forward. The cycle must be closed. And when it's closed with awareness, the bond is preserved on another level, without constant pain, without the need for signs, without emotional dependency. Just as a presence that exists in another plane, quiet but enduring, and that is stronger than any forced attempt at contact. Those who understand this stop searching outside for what is already integrated within. The need for contact dissolves and gives way to stability. The pain of loss makes space for the clarity of symbolic presence. Memories stop hurting and become part of the foundation. And it's at that moment that communication between planes becomes purer. Not as something we seek, but as something that naturally happens when necessary and possible. Moving forward also requires courage. Courage to release what can no longer be changed, to accept that some answers won't come, and that certain reunions don't belong to this life. Courage to reorganize routines, silence internal demands, and allow yourself to live fully, even while missing someone. And most of all, courage to understand that your own life still matters, and that continuing on is not a betrayal. It's actually one of the quietest forms of honor. The connection remains, but life must go on with both feet in the present, because no matter how deeply the past marked you, It's in the now that you choose how to turn those marks into strength. And if you can live truthfully, even in absence, you'll realize that no real bond is ever lost. It only changes form and quietly continues alongside those who are mature enough to move forward. Losing someone close changes how we see life. No matter how much we try to prepare, the moment of parting always hits hard. And what comes after is a field of silence, where we don't always know what to do with what we feel. But there's something that must be understood with maturity. Death doesn't end everything. It just changes the way existence is expressed. And understanding this changes not only how we deal with those who've passed, but also how we deal with ourselves. If you've lost someone and feel like you haven't moved on, stop blaming yourself. The pain of absence doesn't follow a schedule, but it also shouldn't be fed endlessly. Suffering must give way to adaptation. You don't need to forget, erase, or replace. But you do need to reorganize your life from what remains. And that means accepting that even without physical presence, your story is still unfolding. The bond remains, but now you're the one who continues, and that is your responsibility. If, on the other hand, fear of death paralyzes you, whether from the idea of your own passing or the possibility of losing someone, the path is different. You need to face what you truly fear. Death itself isn't the problem. What frightens you is what you've projected onto it: pain, loneliness, ending, emptiness. But all of these are human interpretations of something that, in essence, is just transition. You can't control it. What you can do is prepare internally for what will inevitably come. The more resistance you have, the more pain you bring upon yourself. The truth is, thinking about death with maturity is an exercise in freedom. It frees you from urgency, pressure, and the illusion of permanence. It makes you value what's alive now. It forces you to make more conscious choices. And more than anything, it helps you understand that the bond with someone you love doesn't depend on physical presence. It's built on what was lived, and what's real continues to exist on some level even after the end. If you feel that the absence still hurts too much, or that the fear of loss still rules your mind, maybe it's time to face those feelings head-on, without running. Not to get rid of the pain, but to reorganize it. Life will continue with or without answers. It's up to you to decide how you'll walk through it, with resentment or with understanding, with attachment or with presence, with heaviness or with awareness. You don't need to fully understand death to respect it, and you don't need all the answers to accept that it's part of the cycle. You just need to remember that as long as you're here, life is still asking something of you, and that in itself is reason enough to move forward with more courage and more truth. If you made it this far, it's because something inside you recognized what was said. Maybe because of longing, maybe out of fear, or simply because you feel these topics can no longer be ignored. Death exists. Loss is real. But what we do with that while we're alive is what defines the weight or the lightness of our path. Understanding isn't the goal, respect is, and so is living with more awareness. This video wasn't made to offer final answers or easy spiritual promises. It was made to offer perspective, clarity, and a more mature way of looking at what's inevitable. If something inside you was touched, take your time to process, rewatch, reflect, question. What matters is that you don't carry all of this weight alone anymore. There is a way to move forward, and it begins by recognizing that continuing is a choice, not a betrayal of the one who passed. If this content made sense to you, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share it with someone who also needs to hear it. Sometimes a single video can reorganize a thought, ease a pain, or even open a new way of seeing your own life. And if you want to contribute your presence here, leave a comment. Right below, I respect life's timing and I move forward with awareness. That sentence is a point of balance, a reminder that you can move on without disconnecting from what matters.